Usually, when you're diagnosing a medical issue, there's this really comforting expectation of precision, right? Like you break an arm, the X-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the film.
Yeah, exactly. It's a binary system. The physical evidence is just right there, sitting in front of you.
Right. But then you step into the world of human behavior, and suddenly the X-ray machine is entirely useless.
Mm.
I mean, trying to diagnose a behavioral issue without understanding the underlying motivation is, well, it's like trying to figure out why a car won't start by exclusively staring at the steering wheel.
While completely ignoring the fuel tank.
Exactly. You're just staring at the wheel, turning it back and forth, going, why won't this thing move?
That invisible fuel tank is exactly what we're looking at today because for anyone out there who's tackling Domain B of the BCBA task list, specifically Item B, Byte 18, identifying examples of motivating operations, this is the exact concept where a lot of really smart clinicians get stranded.
And that is our mission for this deep dive for Behavioral Intelligence Con Mara Sánchez. We are unpacking motivating operations, or, MOs.
Right.
We really need to figure out exactly how these unseen forces influence the frequency of behavior, their incredibly intimate relationship with reinforcement, and how they dictate everything from severe problem behaviors to a simple, appropriate request.
Yeah. And to do that, we are going to tear down the textbook definitions and look at the actual mechanisms.
Which is so needed.
Oh, totally. We'll explore clinical ABA applications, how this actually plays out in functional behavior assessments, and maybe most importantly for you listening, the specific traps that trip students up on the exam.
Because before we can change a behavior, we have to look at the environmental conditions that make a person actually want to act.
Yes.
Because, you can design the most elaborate, theoretically sound intervention in the world, but if the desire isn't present in the client, nothing happens. It's just a piece of paper.
Absolutely. And, the history behind this is actually critical to understanding how it works. In early behavioral literature, researchers like Keller and Schoenfeld, they called this concept drive.
Right, drive.
But as the science matured, especially through Jack Michael's work in the 1980s and 90s, the field recognized a massive problem with that term.
Because drive sounds like something internal.
Yeah,
Why?
exactly. Drive is mentalistic. It implies this state existing purely inside the skin, which, we can't objectively observe or measure.
Yeah, behaviorism requires us to look at the environment.
Right. So we shifted to identifying the specific environmental variables at play, and we eventually landed on the umbrella term we use today, which is the motivating operation.
Okay, so let's lock down the mechanics of the MO. For the clinician looking at a case, what are the two simultaneous effects they actually need to identify?
So an MO is an environmental variable that alters two things at once. First, it has a value-altering effect. This basically means the MO temporarily increases or decreases the actual reinforcing effectiveness of a stimulus.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I have the terms right.
Sure.
If it increases the value, like establishing a stimulus as a reinforcer, we call it an establishing operation, right? An EO.
You got it. And if it decreases the value, like abolishing its effectiveness, we call it an abolishing operation or an AO.
So the value of the reward itself literally fluctuates.
Yes. It's not static. And that triggers the second mechanism, which is the behavior altering effect.
Okay.
This means the MO evokes, meaning it increases, or abates, meaning it decreases, the current frequency of all behavior that has been reinforced by that specific stimulus in the past.
Okay, think about the Thanksgiving pie analogy from our sources. I love this one because it clarifies the mechanism perfectly.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Right. So imagine you just finished a massive Thanksgiving dinner. You are physically stuffed.
Mm-hmm.
That environmental condition, that extreme satiation, is an abolishing operation, an AO. Mechanically, it triggers a value-altering effect. The pie is temporarily stripped of its power as an effective reinforcer. Like, I am so full you literally couldn't pay me in pie to get up and wash the dishes.
Yeah, the pie has zero currency in that specific moment.
Right. And because of that, it immediately triggers the behavior-altering effect. Because the pie lacks value, that AO abates any behavior I would normally engage in to acquire pie.
You're not moving.
I'm not walking to the kitchen. I'm not asking for a slice. I'm literally just sitting on the couch.
Exactly. And if we pull that back to clinical practice, the fundamental takeaway for you as a practitioner is that reinforcement literally cannot occur without desire.
Which seems obvious, but we miss it.
We constantly see this error in the field. A clinician assumes, like, A sticker, an iPad, or an edible is a reinforcer simply because the client selected it from a preference assessment.
Right, like, oh, they picked the iPad yesterday, it's a reinforcer.
Exactly. But if the MO isn't active, if the client isn't in a state of deprivation that makes the iPad valuable in that exact moment, it is not going to function as a reinforcer. The MO dictates the magnitude of the desire.
Which brings us to a massive trap.
Oh boy, yes.
If we acknowledge this internal state of desire, how do we reliably distinguish it from an external trigger? Because this is the #1 mistake students make on the BCBA exam, right? Confusing motivating operations with discriminative stimuli, the SDs.
It is everywhere. Students conflate them constantly because both are antecedent variables. They both occur prior to the behavior, and they both evoke behavior.
Right, they look identical on the surface.
Exactly. But their underlying functions are entirely different. So the golden rule for separating them on the exam is this. An SD signals the availability of reinforcement, while an MO changes the momentary value of the reinforcer.
Availability versus value. Let's run that through the marathon runner scenario.
Sick. Okay, imagine a runner who just crossed the finish line after running 26.2 miles.
They're exhausted.
And profoundly dehydrated. That physiological state of water deprivation is the MO. It establishes water as highly valuable.
Yeah.
Now, as they walk through the finisher chute, they see a folding table covered in little cups of water. That table is the SD.
Because the table doesn't make them thirsty, the deprivation makes them thirsty.
Right. The table simply signals that water is available right there, right now, if they reach out and grab a cup.
Ah, I see.
But the runner only reaches out because the deprivation makes the water desirable. If a spectator who, just drank a liter of water walks past that exact same table, the SD is still present. It's still signaling availability.
But the spectator walks right by because the MO is absent. They aren't thirsty.
Exactly.
Hold on, though, because that breaks down for me a little bit in the real world.
Yeah.
I want to look at the annoying boss scenario we have in the sources.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say it's Saturday afternoon. I'm on my couch, totally relaxed. Suddenly, my annoying boss texts me demanding I complete a huge stack of paperwork over the weekend.
Oh, worst nightmare.
Right. And seeing that text instantly triggers my desire to, throw my phone into the ocean to escape the demand.
Naturally.
To me, that text feels exactly like an SD. It is a sudden environmental trigger that directly causes an action. How is that not an SD?
See, that scenario is exactly how the exam will try to lure you into a trap. In that situation, the text message from your boss is an MO. It is not an SD.
It triggered the behavior.
Because receiving that text creates a worsening set of conditions. It temporarily establishes the value of escape. Before your phone buzzed, you were relaxing. You didn't need to escape anything. The text manufactured the need. It altered the value of escaping.
Okay, then what is the SD in that scenario? If the text is the fuel tank, what is the ignition switch?
The SD for actually escaping the work is your physical location. The fact that you are away from the office sitting on your couch signals that escape is physically available. You can just turn off your phone.
Wait, really? The location is the SD?
Yeah. Think about it. If you were sitting in a cubicle right next to your boss and they verbally handed you the assignment, the MO to escape would still be there. You'd still hate it.
Yeah, I'd still want to run away.
Right. But the SD for escape might be absent because you can't just ignore them to their face without massive consequences. Escape isn't available. So the text makes you want to escape. Being at home signals that you actually can.
The text doesn't signal availability. The text makes escape necessary. Wow. That is a crucial distinction.
It really is.
Okay, so if we can spot an MO and separate it from an SD, we need to categorize where these motivations actually originate.
Right. We divide them into two camps. Unconditioned motivating operations, or UMOs, and conditioned motivating operations, or CMOs.
And the UMOs are the biological drives, right?
Yeah.
These require absolutely no learning history.
Exactly. They are phylogenetically programmed into us for survival. There are 9 primary UMOs you need to know.
Okay, let's list them.
Deprivation of food, water, sleep, oxygen, activity, and sex. Plus 3 related to aversive stimulation, temperature changes, like being too hot or too cold, and the onset of pain.
Let's look at the mechanics of those, because pain onset functions a bit differently than, say, food deprivation, doesn't it?
It does. Food deprivation builds gradually over time. The longer you go without eating, the higher the value of food becomes. The onset of pain, however, is an immediate, sharp EO for pain relief.
Right, like if you accidentally place your hand on a hot stove, you don't need a learning history to know that removing your hand is highly valuable.
No, the biological response is instantaneous.
Okay, that covers the biological baseline.
Yeah.
But the really complex behaviors we see in a clinical setting usually stem from the learned motivations, right?
Yeah.
The conditioned motivating operations, or CMOs.
Yes, the CMOs are where things get really interesting.
Can we break down the 3 types of CMOs and how they mechanically alter behavior? Because I always get the acronyms confused.
Totally. Let's start with the surrogate CMO, or CMOS. This develops through temporal pairing.
Temporal pairing, what does that look like?
It's when a neutral stimulus is paired so consistently with a UMO that the neutral stimulus eventually acquires the exact same value-altering and behavior-altering effects as the biological drive.
Give me an example of how that pairing happens in real time.
Okay, imagine working in a factory where a really loud whistle blows every day at noon. By noon, you are biologically in a state of food deprivation.
Right, you're hungry, so you eat.
Exactly. So the whistle and the hunger are temporally paired over months. Now, it's Saturday, you are at home, you just ate a huge brunch, and you are completely satiated.
Stuffed?
But you live near the factory, and you hear that noon whistle blow. Suddenly, you find yourself walking to the kitchen, opening the fridge, and looking for a snack.
Wow.
The whistle functioned as a surrogate CMO. It made food valuable despite the absence of biological deprivation, purely due to that learned pairing.
I have to ask, though, how is that conceptually different from classic Pavlovian conditioning?
Yeah.
Sounds like you're just describing a conditioned response, like Pavlov's dogs drooling at a bell.
It's a really great question, and it's a fundamental distinction in behavior analysis.
Okay.
Pavlovian or respondent conditioning is about eliciting a reflex. The bell rings, the dog involuntarily salivates. It's an automatic physiological response.
They can't control it.
Exactly. A CMOS, however, evokes operant behavior, voluntary behavior.
Ah.
The factory whistle doesn't just make your stomach rumble. It actively alters the value of food, which then evokes the complex, multi-step behavior of walking to the kitchen, opening the fridge, and choosing a snack.
So it's about motivation driving choice, not just a reflex.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense. The whistle creates a temporary artificial drive state. What about the second type, the reflexive CMO, or CMOR?
The CMOR acts as a warning stimulus. The textbook definition states that it systematically precedes a worsening or improvement of a situation, altering a relationship with itself so that its own removal becomes highly reinforcing.
Okay, you're going to have to translate that jargon for me. Altering a relationship with itself.
I know, it's a mouthful. Think of a CMOR as a highly sensitive threat detector in your brain.
A threat detector, okay.
When a specific stimulus consistently warns you that things are about to get aversive, your brain actively changes the value of that specific warning sign. You don't just want to avoid the eventual bad thing. You want to immediately destroy or escape the warning sign itself.
Let's put that in a classroom setting, because I feel like we see this all the time.
Oh, every single day. A teacher walks over and places a difficult math worksheet face down on a student's desk.
Just the paper.
Just the paper. Historically, math demands have been highly aversive for this student. The mere appearance of that worksheet is the warning stimulus. The threat detector goes off.
Right.
The worksheet acts as a CMOR. It instantly establishes escape as highly valuable, and it evokes behaviors that have successfully removed the worksheet in the past.
Like flipping the desk.
Exactly. The student might sweep the paper off the desk or hit the teacher. They aren't reacting to the math itself yet. They are reacting to the warning sign. They're terminating the CMOR.
The worksheet isn't biologically painful, but it reliably warns of impending instructional pain. That is a brilliant way to frame it.
It really clarifies the function of the behavior.
Okay, so the third one is the transitive CMO, or CMOT.
Okay. The CMOT is an event that establishes another stimulus as a necessary condition to complete a chain or access a reinforcer. Essentially, it is a stimulus that makes another tool suddenly valuable.
I want to pull in the clinical highlight from our sources for this one, the Hall and Sundberg study from 1987.
Such a great study.
It's amazing. They were working with a deaf teenager with autism who had a history of severe tantrums. And the clinical goal was to teach him to appropriately demand or request items.
Right.
They knew he loved instant coffee, so they gave him the jar of instant coffee, but they deliberately withheld the hot water.
It's a beautiful piece of environmental contrivance.
They didn't just wait for motivation to happen, they engineered a trap to capture it. Giving him the instant coffee acted as a CMOT.
Because the powder is useless without the water.
Exactly. The coffee powder was entirely useless without the water. So possessing the coffee temporarily established hot water as immensely valuable. It set the perfect natural stage to evoke the appropriate demand for water. Instead of drilling flashcards in a sterile room, they manipulated the environment to make the request necessary. And it worked. He learned the demand, and the tantrums decreased.
That is just a masterclass in utilizing a CMOT. And, it scales up perfectly when we look at how clinicians actively manipulate these variables during functional behavior assessments, or FBAs.
How so?
Well, when we conduct an experimental functional analysis, an FA, we are basically operating a laboratory for MOs.
We are actively manufacturing desire to test our hypotheses.
Precisely. Take the demand condition in an FA. We deliberately present an aversive task to the client. We do this to artificially generate an MO for escape.
To see what they do.
Right. We want to see if the problem behavior is sensitive to that specific motivation. If the client engages in the target behavior, we immediately withdraw the demand, reinforcing the behavior.
And if it works?
If the problem behavior spikes during the demand condition compared to, say, a play condition where no demands are present, we have isolated the function. We prove that the behavior is driven by the MO for escape.
So the FA helps us diagnose the fuel tank.
Exactly.
But once we know what's driving the behavior, how do we actually use that knowledge to build a treatment plan? Like, how do we decrease the problem behavior while increasing the appropriate alternative?
There are two major antecedent interventions you need to know that rely on manipulating MOs. The first is non-contingent reinforcement, or NCR.
Okay.
NCR functions specifically as an abolishing operation, an AO.
So it basically kills the value of the reinforcer before the client even has a chance to act out.
Exactly. Let's say a functional analysis reveals a child engages in severe property destruction solely to gain adult attention.
Right.
With NCR, the clinician provides that attention on a fixed time schedule, completely independent of the child's behavior. We might provide high-quality, focused attention every 5 minutes, regardless of what the child is doing.
My favorite analogy for NCR is go to the grocery store.
Oh, yeah, we've all done this.
Right. If you go to the supermarket starving, which is a massive EO, you are highly likely to engage in the problem behavior of impulse buying literally everything in the snack aisle.
You're just throwing cookies in the cart.
Exactly. Your environment is filled with SDs and your MO is peaking. But if you eat a massive heavy meal right before you go to the store, you saturate your biological need. You abolish the MO.
Yeah.
You can walk down the cookie aisle and the cookies have zero value to you. NCR works the exact same way. We are feeding the behavioral appetite on a schedule so the client never feels the deprivation that triggers the problem behavior.
That's a great way to put it. Saturating the environment is a highly effective way to manage problem behavior, but it does have a limitation.
Which is?
NCR does not teach a new functional skill. That requires our second major intervention, functional communication training, or FCT, which is often paired with incidental teaching.
Because FCT is about teaching that alternative appropriate behavior, right? Like teaching a client to man for a break or ask for an item instead of hitting.
Right. But for FCT to be successful, the alternative behavior must be functionally equivalent to the problem behavior, and it must be highly sensitive to the current MO.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you cannot teach a child to man for a break when they are happily playing with blocks. The MO for escape doesn't exist in that moment.
Oh, because they don't want to escape playing.
Exactly. You have to introduce a demand to create the MO and then prompt the request. In incidental teaching, you arrange the environment to capture that motivation organically.
Like putting something out of reach.
Yes. You place a highly preferred tool on a shelf that is visible but just out of reach. The child sees it, the MO to access it spikes, and you use that exact window of intense desire to prompt the verbal request. You harness the MO to fuel the acquisition of the new skill.
Man, we have covered the mechanics, the exam traps, and the clinical applications. What is the ultimate takeaway for the clinician listening right now who is preparing for their exam?
Well, I ask you to consider this as a final thought to chew on. We spend so much energy in behavior analysis fighting to extinguish problem behaviors or battling to force compliance, right?
Yeah, constantly.
But as we move toward a future filled with, like, AI and smart environments, think about what happens when our surroundings become so intuitive that they automatically saturate our MOs before we even feel a drive.
Whoa.
If a smart home perfectly predicts your temperature needs, your food preferences, and your social interactions, the environment basically acts as a constant NCR.
A constant abolishing operation.
Exactly. And if we never experience the deprivation that creates an MO, do we lose the very behaviors, the striving, the requesting, the problem solving that make us human? It's just a fascinating philosophical angle to consider as you study how fundamental these drives really are.
If the environment perfectly manages the MO, the behavior never happens. That completely reframes how we look at motivation. You don't always have to fight the behavior. Sometimes you just have to manage the invisible forces driving it.
Perfectly said.
To everyone listening, we want to wish you the absolute best of luck as you continue your exam preparation or refine your daily clinical practice. Understanding Domain B is a massive leap forward.
It really is.
We invite you to continue the BCBA study series with Behavioral Intelligence con Mara Sánchez. And hey, if you are looking for more incredible resources to sharpen your skills, be sure to follow Amethyst Therapy Services.
Highly recommend them.
You can find their materials on their website at www.amethysttherapyservices.com or reach out to them directly via email at info@amethysttherapyservices.com. Keep hunting for those hidden motivations, and we will see you on the next deep dive.